Okay, so this week I was really looking forward to making a track from scratch. I feel like I've been kind of doing a lot of tutorials lately, and I just wanted to make something on camera and share the process with you all. So I got out all my favorite gear. I started messing with a drum loop and chopping it up and came up with something I was really enjoying on the Digitakt. And about halfway through filming, my Digitakt started displaying the gray lines of death. Not death for my Digitakt, thankfully, just death for the screen itself. So my beloved Digitakt II is taking a little trip to the Electron workshop where it's getting the screen replaced. Hopefully you should have it back sometime next week and I can do another kind of something from scratch video for you all. I probably could do it with what I have here, but I was just really excited about what I was making. So I'm excited to get that back and keep going. But in the meantime, let's keep the tutorials coming. I have one more thing that I wanted to explore, and that is multisampling on the blackbox. I haven't really talked about this on the channel, and I think it's one of the coolest things that the blackbox can do. And especially most recently, the firmware was updated so that each preset can accommodate way more samples than previously possible. So you could multi-sample all of your favorite synth patches into one preset and like toggle between them for a really portable synthesizer performance machine. And if you're not familiar with what multi-sampling is, traditionally when you sample something, you take a note, you sample it, and then you artificially stretch it across the keyboard to play all the different pitches. But multisampling, you actually sample each individual note of the synthesizer or the keyboard or whatever it is that you're sampling, and it gives you obviously a much more realistic sample because there's no artificial time stretching. It's just each note is the sampled version of its counterpart. And the black box can do this automatically. So there's a process in here that multi-samples whatever you want via MIDI and audio automatically so that you don't have to sample each individual note on your keyboard and manually map them. It's really cool, and I haven't tried it up until recently. I got this Roland S1, which is an awesome little polysynth, and it has some presets that I really love. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to try and get one of these presets multi-sampled into the black box so I can control it from the black box or with the MIDI controller if I'm out and about and don't have the S1. And there's one preset in particular that I really like and want to put in the black box. I think it is pattern 2. Let's hear it. If I take the delay and reverb off because I'm going to put it on in the black box, this is what it sounds like. Wow, that delay and reverb makes a big difference. So I want to multi-sample that. Here's how it's done. It's not super hard, but there are a few stumbling blocks you're going to want to look out for if you're doing this on the black box. So first of all, we got to hook it up. Essentially, we're doing a big circle. We go MIDI out of the black box into the MIDI in of the synth, and then audio out of the synth into audio in of the black box. So you can see how this works. The black box sends MIDI information into the synth that it wants to multi-sample, and then audio comes out of the synth into the black box and it records each individual one. And this is where you might encounter the first stumbling block. There are 2 different kinds of TRS MIDI. So we're talking about this 1/8" MIDI connection that we have here between devices. There's TRS MIDI A and there is TRS MIDI B. More and more devices are just going with TRS A. It's becoming kind of the standard. You're going to find it on most devices that you go out and buy, but some devices are still TRS B, and the black box, unfortunately, is one of them. So it does not play nice with devices like the S1 that have this TRS A MIDI input. If you plug it in with just an 1/8" cable, it's not going to work. So you need this little adapter like I have here. There's no power or anything. It was cheap. I think it was like $10 on Amazon, but So once you have MIDI in, then you go audio out of synth into audio in of the black box. And then you're connected, you're hooked up. Just as a side note, this MIDI keyboard is plugged into the black box, not the synth. I'm going to use it later once I've done my multi-sampling and I want to play the patch that I've sampled. Once you're hooked up, then there's a few settings in the black box that you want to check too. So let's come over here to Tools. And first, let's check out our MIDI settings. So obviously MIDI out just needs to be enabled. You have to be able to send MIDI out to your synthesizer or your whatever it is that you're multi-sampling. And then the other thing that you want to do is you want to come over here to your clock settings and you want to make sure that the black box is not sending any transport or clock. There's a sequencer in this synth. So when I was first doing this, you have to press record to start the multi-sampling and play, but then my sequence would start playing on the S1 and it would ruin my multi-sample. So you can't send clock or transport while you're doing this. You have to make sure that this setting is off. And then you should be ready to go. So it's pretty straightforward. Go to Info. And then up here, you'll see a little 1X. Rather than 1X, we are going to make a multi-sample. And then we have a bunch of settings here. We'll talk about each and every one. First of all, obviously, it's your record input. Like I said, the S1 is going straight into the audio input, so you can see it metering when I play a note. Make sure that's good. Add some gain if you need to. And then the file name by default is multisample, but if you press Info, you can rename it, and that is a good idea because you don't want to have 50 multi-samples that are called multisample 1, 2, 3, yada, yada. I'll just call it S1 to keep it simple. And then record monitoring as it goes through the multi-sampling process in real time and samples note by note, you have the option of monitoring and hearing what is happening. So I like to leave this on because I like to hear what's happening here. And then this is kind of funny. So the monitor output, because I'm monitoring out of the black box via the headphone out, just the regular main output, you would think that would be an option here as like an out 1-2 or 1LR, but there's not. You can choose 1 left or 1 right, or you can choose 2. I keep it on 2 and I still hear it through my headphone output. I don't really know why. I don't have anything coming out of output 2, but it works. So we're not going to question it. We're just going to go with it. And then this part is really important. You have to tell the black box which note of the synthesizer to start sampling on and which note to end its sampling on. And it will sample in between those ranges depending on what you tell it in this setting right here, which is sample every. Obviously, if you want a perfect reproduction of your source, then sample every 1 note, and it's going to sample every individual note in that range. However, that takes up a lot of space. That's a lot of samples to sample every single note in between C2 and C6. So I like to kind of find a happy medium here. I want this to be pretty accurate, so I'm going to go for 3. Sometimes I go for 5. And what happens is the black box will sample every 3rd note between C2 and C6. And for the notes that it does not sample directly, it will stretch the nearest sampled note to hit that pitch. It's really, really subtle when you sample every 3. I don't really notice it. If you have a really sharp ear, you might hear that some notes are sampled and some notes are slightly stretched. If you go, sample every 16 notes, you're going to hear it a lot more clearly. But let's keep it on sample every 3, and we'll see if that works out for us. Velocity layers is an interesting one. You can tell the black box which velocity layers to sample. I just want to sample 1 single velocity. These keys aren't velocity sensitive. I'm used to this patch the way it is, but if you're sampling a piano or something where you want velocity to apply per sample, you can tell it how many velocity layers you want, all the way up to 16. So if you sampled every note at 16 velocity layers, you've got a pretty realistic instrument that you're playing back. But of course, it takes a ton of storage. So let's keep it on 1 for me. Max velocity 127, that's fine. And then note length and release length are really important as well. So you're telling the black box, I want you to hold the note for this long, and then sample the release for this long after you stop holding the note. I only want it to sample note on for 1 second and the release for a whole 8 seconds to get all of that tail. But mess around with these settings depending on the instrument that you're using. If it's a piano, you're going to want to have a longer note length and a shorter release length, but that depends on the instrument. And then last setting, I promise, but this one is super important. Which MIDI channel does your device receive from? So I know that the S1 receives MIDI on channel 3. So I'm telling the black box, you have to send information on channel 3 so the S1 will receive it. So let's do it. So I hold record, press play, and here it goes. It's multi-sampling. And this is actually, I didn't think about this, but this is going to take a while. That's kind of a lot of notes that I'm telling it to sample. So I'm going to go grab some coffee, and then I'll come back when this is done, and we will continue with the video. Okay, 17 of 17. That took a really long time, but we're just about done. Let's see what happens when it finishes. It saves it, and you're good to go. If you go back to your pads, you can see that that S1 multisample is now loaded up into a pad, and if you go to your keys, you should be able to play it. Cool, and that works. Now I want to play this with my MIDI keyboard as a full synthesizer, just like the S1. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit info twice. We're going to go to configure, and then you can see that the poly mode is set to mono. So the first thing we're going to do is turn that up. You can go all the way up to poly X, which I guess is 10. I'm going to go for poly 4 because this is a 4-voice synth and I want it to be the same. And then for MIDI in, we have to tell the black box, we listen for the MIDI channel that the key step is sending out, which is channel 1. And then you don't have to do this, but the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to our main part of our info section in this sample, and you can see that the level here is modulated by velocity. So we're going to turn that off. And then before I even play it, I'm going to crank this delay and reverb, turn the decay way up. Okay, and moment of truth, how does it sound? This is what the original sounded like. Now, I don't have enough keys to play that full range, but something like this. Pretty good, right? I have actually really liked the reverb and delay on the black box. And I've got that patch kind of just frozen in time in the black box. And then the other thing I want to mention is after I multi-sampled for the first time, I couldn't find out where the patch was that I wanted to recall. So if you just want to pull up that multi-sample again, go to load. And then you actually need to go to presets, which is a little confusing because it's not a preset, it's a patch, but that multi-sample is stored in a presets file. So then go to presets, I go to multi-sample, and in here I have S1, so I can load it. There's all my samples. I hit file, load all. Now all of those have been loaded to this pad. So yeah, there it is. Pretty cool. I'm planning on kind of going through and sampling all of my favorite synth patches and my favorite soft synths and some of the S1 stuff, and just having a collection of synths in here that I can call on when I just need a quick bass line or a little 3 or 4 note chord. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. The process, like I said, is pretty straightforward, but there were just a few areas that I got mixed up on, so I wanted to share my experience and see if it's helpful for you. Pray to the Electron gods that I get my Digitakt back next week, and I will make a track from scratch. We'll get back into making some stuff. Thank you, as always, for joining. Leave a comment if you saw that I missed anything or if there's an easier way to do anything that I've done. Thanks for watching, y'all. I will see you in a week.